Welcome to Autism ADHD TV. It is the place to be for parents and professionals. I'm your host, Holly Blanc Moses, the mom psychologist who gets it. We dive into all kinds of important information like behavior, social skills, and learning. All right, let's get started. I am so excited today to be speaking with Dr. Temple Grandin and Dr. Debra Moore. Dr. Temple Grandin is one of the world's most respected experts in the fields of autism and animal behavior and livestock handling. In 2010, Time 100, an annual list of the most influential people in the world, named her in the Heroes category. She was also the subject of an Emmy and Golden Globe winning movie. Dr. Debra Moore is a psychologist who has worked extensively with children, teens, and adults on the autism spectrum. She believes in therapy approaches that focus on strengths and interests, recognize the individual differences of each client, and foster confidence and potential. She was the founder and director of Fall Creek Counseling Associates, a practice that served the greater Sacramento area and was an approved teaching site for psychologists in training. Now retired from active practice, she devotes her time to volunteering and writing. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Great to be here.
I'm thrilled that you're here. We are going to be talking about your newest book. I'm going to hold it up for those of you who are watching, 9 Mindsets for Helping Kids on the Spectrum, Navigating Autism. You know, I have to say, I do love this book, and I had a really hard time putting it down. It is jam-packed full of wonderful information for both parents and professionals. So are you both ready to answer some questions?
Yes.
Go for it.
I'll go for it. All right. At the very beginning of this book, you both write about putting more value on potential than struggle. So what do you mean by that?
The diagnosis of autism is a deficit-based medical model. And sometimes we get stuck in that. And we look at the behaviors that are challenging and causing meltdowns and so forth. And we just try to change the behavior instead of one of two other things. One is to figure out what's causing the behavior, what's the trigger, and deal with that. Often it's sensory or other issues. And the other thing is to equally or more focus on what the child's strengths are. All children have strengths. Autistic children have just as many as anybody else, and we can build on those step by step. And that's how we get to potential.
Excellent. I agree. I think sometimes we're looking at this sort of deficit model, and it really doesn't need to be that way. So anytime we feel that we're going down that road, I think it's important that we shift gears.
I want to just make a comment. Another problem you've got with an autism diagnosis is it's so broad. You're going all the way from Elon Musk, who I've always thought he was autistic, but he came out on a comedy show and told everybody that he was autistic and meant it. Einstein had no speech until age 3. So you got people like that at one end of the spectrum. And the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody who's nonverbal that cannot dress themselves. And it's got the same label. That doesn't make much sense to me. And when the kids are little, I looked really severe when I was 3. I had no speech, constant tantrums, no interaction. Fortunately, a really good early intervention program really worked well for me. But there'll be somebody else, you do a really good early intervention program, and they still have a lot of problems. It's a continuous trait, going from slightly socially awkward to a very, very severe disability.
Right, and that's a good point. And I do think it gets confusing when we're talking about diagnosis and also the potential of others. I think sometimes, unfortunately, when we look at children who may be considered higher on the spectrum, where they have these skills, they may be talking, but then there is an assumption about things must be easy for them. And then, unfortunately, for someone who is not using words to speak or has a hard time taking care of themselves, there isn't enough attention about their potential and their strengths.
Well, the other thing, you also have to just work on basic skills. There's one of the chapters in Navigating Autism is preparing kids for the real world. And one of the places I really see where parents are not doing a good job on this is learning basic life skills. Shopping. I'm just appalled at the number of smart kids that are in high school, doing well in high school, and they've never gone shopping. They don't have a bank account. They aren't learning how to ride the bus. Just basic things. There's a tendency to overprotect. Now, I'm a big fan of a slow transition for something like teaching shopping or work skills. I'll give you an example because my mind works in specific examples. We were at an airport and I ran into a mom and her 12-year-old daughter and found out she hadn't shopped. So I gave her $5 and said, go in that newsstand across the hall and buy something. Now, that's a really good baby step. It was a newsstand across the hall. It was not on the other end of the airport. Or you're stopping and you're getting gas. The mom needs to say, run in the store and get a jug of milk. You know, and you're right there and you can see the store. You can see in the store if you pick the right gas station. You start with things like that. So it's a slow transition. But things I was doing when I was 7 and 8 years old, learning how to order food in restaurants, things like that. There's a lot of fully verbal kids that aren't learning these basic skills.
I agree. I think that's an excellent point. And is early on as we can teach those skills, the better. I wish that we could cover everything in this book because it's so good. But let's talk about just some of the mindsets for helping kids with autism spectrum disorder you talk about.
We have 2 chapters in the book that I think are important for teachers and parents and all the professionals. And those are medical conditions associated with autism and psychiatric emotional conditions associated with autism. These are overlooked too often and add to a child's struggles. So we talk about everything from GI upset, which is very common, to undiagnosed pain of any sort, especially for children who have a problem with verbal communication. We have to be a detective. So we give you checklists in the book to go down, dozens of questions to ask that might give you hints about what's going on with your child that they're not able to tell you. Even with highly verbal children, they often won't share the information. They may be having close to panic attacks and they don't know how to put that into words to you, but that changes their ability to learn, to attend, it changes the whole quality of their life. So those are 2 chapters that I think the checklist and questionnaires will give you some real practical tips.
I think that's a really good point, especially in nonverbal. And the research is very clear. Things like gastrointestinal issues, that's definitely increased with individuals with autism. It's very well documented in the literature. It's sort of like, for me, for example, I was not built by the best building contractor. I've got skin problems. I've got weird small teeth and missing a bunch of teeth. I've had some colitis issues. If you have somebody who's nonverbal and those things are not treated, you are going to have very bad behavior problems.
I agree. And I'm glad that both of you wrote about this topic because we do know, like you said, autistic children are much more likely to experience medical conditions than their peers. And if they're in a place where they're confused about what's happening in their body and it's difficult to communicate what's happening for them, absolutely, that's usually what we see is challenging behavior. And we don't want to mess that up, right? We want to make sure that we're always looking at medical conditions before we're talking about changing any kind of behavior. Another thing I really like about your book is your examples that you give, the stories that you tell, the checklists that you use. It's very digestible, but it's real information that you can jump in and start using right away. So I really appreciate that as both a mother of an autistic child and also a psychologist. So it was very helpful for me.
Well, another thing that's really overlooked are a lot of the sensory issues that these kids have. When I was a child, the school bell went off. I wrote Emergence, my very first book. It's like a dentist drill hitting a nerve. And I think it's hard for somebody who doesn't have that sensation from a school bell, has a hard time understanding that. Now sensory problems are much more well recognized. I've written about it in many of my other writings, such as The Autistic Brain, a whole bunch of scientific stuff on this. Also, sensory problems are extremely variable. One individual may have sound sensitivity, another one may have visual sensitivity, where bright lights and a lot of contrasting colors really bother them. One of the biggest issues in the environment is cheap LED lights. I have one on my desk lamp and it flickers. I actually tolerate it just fine. But somebody else who use that cheap LED light bulb, and they're a cheap piece of junk, they burn out pretty quick. It's going to make the whole room flash like a strobe light. And I would say that people are always asking me about designing classrooms and things like that. I say, you've got to have high quality LED lights that don't flicker. There's all kinds of LED lights, and some are really good and some are really terrible. The ones they use in chicken houses are absolutely the best. Big Dutchman LED lights, they don't flicker. The other thing I'd want to avoid if I was designing a classroom is stripes and checkerboards. A whole lot of real high contrasty stuff like that. But the lighting is probably big number one.
I'm glad that you brought up, because sensory differences and sensitivities impact everything. I can't imagine walking in an environment where it feels like a strobe light is going off, and then I'm supposed to pay attention to what the teacher's saying and not be distracted by all the other things that are happening.
Well, you've probably seen those fire alarms. They've got them in hotels where it has a strobe light.
Right.
And they'll be flashing on and off in the room. Well, if that was your classroom, I don't think you'd get very much work done.
Exactly. So it could be misinterpreted as refusing to do schoolwork, when really that's not it at all.
But visual problems, also there's some kids where when they go to read, they see the print jiggle on the page. And in your brain, nobody knows how this works, there's circuits to stabilize the visual image, because you're moving your head all the time, you're moving your eyes all the time, but your image stays stable. Scientists actually don't know how it works, but both head injuries and developmental differences mess up those circuits. So then you get things like pixelation of images. Donna Williams has described that in her books, where visual images actually break up, similar to the diagrams in Oliver Sacks's migraine book. You can get some of these same effects. And a real simple intervention that sometimes works for this is try printing the work on different pastel papers, like light tan, light blue, light lavender, just the real pale colored papers. It's a simple intervention that sometimes works. Now, I don't have the visual problems. This is where it's so variable, but I've had students that have had them. And I've had students in my class where some lavender paper in a printer or some tan paper in a printer saved their college education. Now, it doesn't work for everybody, but there's a subgroup in there.
And I think that's just yet another example of, and Debra, you were mentioning, like being a detective, figuring out what does work for this individual child. It's interesting that we're talking about this because you both advocate for customized interventions for children on the spectrum. And let's talk a little bit about what that means.
We talk about customized intervention and also customized evaluations,
Right.
which I would love to see more of. There's a whole chapter on doing whole child evaluations, which means basically attending not just to the autism, but to the context, to the environment, to the resources the child has, absolutely to the sensory environment of the testing room, making those accommodations. A child may perform on a subtest of a typical IQ test very, very differently if they're doing it on white paper or, like Temple was talking about, on beige paper. They may do very differently if they are asked to respond verbally versus non-verbally. All of those things have to, again, we play detective. We have to, I think as clinicians, sometimes we get boxed in by our training and a little label locked. And a lot of us are verbal thinkers, highly verbal thinkers. We don't have the visual kind of wiring that Temple or a lot of the folks on the spectrum have. And we forget. And so when we're not getting through, it's like we're talking to someone who's hard of hearing. We just talk louder, which is really silly. We have to play detective and talk to them as their unique person. So that's the case for evaluations and also for any kind of an intervention.
And I think the label locking problem is actually going to be worse with the verbal thinkers. In fact, one of the really big benefits of navigating autism is for parents who are verbal thinkers. This is probably one of the best books to get. I'm learning more about how verbal thinkers think. And you see, when I think about the spectrum, I'm seeing Einstein and Elon Musk. I mean, I see pictures of them. And then I'm seeing Tito Mukapadahe, who can type independently, but can't control his movements, who's nonverbal. And then I can see another person that's nonverbal and they have epilepsy and a lot of other medical problems on top of the autism, probably would not type independently. You see, there's specific examples. They're visual specific examples where the verbal thinker, okay, autism. And I see medical doctors get trapped in the label locking, and this is really bad. Like the child will have a gastrointestinal issue and they go, well, it's just autism. And they don't even think to check the child for a gastrointestinal issue that's readily treatable.
That's one of the issues that we talk about in, preparing a team for the child, is that each team member tends, unfortunately, to see the world and the child through their professional filter, and it's limiting. So it's really, really important for parents to recognize that that's a tendency. You can have a really good clinician, they're still going to have their filter. They all need to be talking to each other. We need multiple points, multiple sets of eyes on every kid.
I think that's really important that you said that, Deborah. And I think it's a good reminder for professionals who are reading this book. It's also a good reminder for parents and what information they should expect in treatment and evaluations. Sometimes I might even go in and when I'm doing an evaluation to see if someone is on the spectrum, might even go overboard a little bit. Like, I want to talk to lots of people. I want to know why a parent would see something at home and maybe the teacher does not see that at school. I want to know what time of day they feel better and feel rested, when they may not be hungry. I mean, there's all these things we have to think about.
Right. I want to know what happened the morning before I'm doing the evaluation.
Right.
I want to see home videos before I do the evaluation. And I want to talk to extended family members who may not have the same filter that a parent does.
Another thing that I've had a lot of parents tell me and teachers tell me is the behavior of the child might be really good at school and bad at home, or really good at home and terrible at school. And it's extremely important for parents and teachers to get on the same track, because if the behavior is really different in one place, either good or bad, there's something different that they're doing. And they need to follow the example of either well, I don't care what's home or school, but the place, what are the people doing in the place where the behavior is so much better? And I've run into that quite often, especially with elementary school kids.
I hear that as well. And we can look at that in lots of different ways. So we have to, I think, be careful as professionals and parents not to make those assumptions, but look at all of the information with curiosity and see how that fits and how that works for
what I tell them is, let's say home is good, school's terrible. Well, then let's find out what they're doing at home. And if school's wonderful, then I tell the parents, go find out what they're doing at the school. Go get advice from the place that's having the best results. That's a simple thing to try.
And I think that's really good to understand, again, how important that communication is. And it could be that child is so anxious that they're holding it together all day at school and then sort of falling apart because they are absolutely exhausted.
Yep, that can definitely sometimes be the case.
Yep.
Yeah, there's so many different considerations. And I love this book for so many reasons. And one of the major reasons is the detail that both of you go into as far as what to think about. So there's always, in every page that I turned, that I found in this book, and I thought, gosh, what a great reminder. Or this would be amazing as a checklist for parents and professionals to know and to be thinking about things. And there are many things that you can miss. And this book is very comprehensive, but in a digestible way. That's one of the reasons why I like it so much.
I'm glad you found it that way. That was definitely our intention, that you could pick it up at any point and use a part of it. You didn't feel like you had this big book to plow through from beginning to end.
It is, and it's a great reference to have, I think, as things come up. For example, if your child is getting ready for another evaluation, it would be a good thing to pick it up and review that again. And I think really is a great resource for parents to think of questions to ask and information to provide. And also, again, a great reminder for therapists in so many ways, like communicating.
I want to make a comment. A question I get all the time is kids get fixated on something. So what's the difference between a fixation or an obsession with something and an ability? In many of my writings, I've talked extensively about the different kinds of minds. Object visualizers like me, who think in pictures, more mathematical, pattern thinking, musical brains, and word thinkers. That would be an example of an ability, like good at art, or good with mechanical things, or good at math, or good at music, or good at writing. Those are abilities. But then, when I was a little kid, I got obsessed with drawing a single horse head over and over again. Okay, horses were the interest. Okay, drawing the same horse over and over again, sort of a fixated, obsessive. So my mother broadened it. Take the interest and broaden it. Let's say it's cars. Let's read about cars. We can do math with cars. Draw different cars. Take it and broaden it. So horses or cars are an interest, where something like visual thinking and art, that's an ability, or math, that would be an ability, or music. There's a difference there. And I've been getting that question a whole lot, especially recently.
And that's a good point. Temple, when you were on my podcast last, we talked about supporting a child's interest. I think that shows how important that is, and what a great example. But also understanding that, it doesn't have to be this one thing. There could be related
That's right.
Information.
Get things associated with cars. Okay, roads are associated with cars. So
Right.
Then you might lead to designing of roads or bridges on roads, because those are associated with cars. You want to broaden it. That's what you want to do. Also, kids need to get out and see enough stuff. Now, that's why I did this book, The Outdoor Scientist, to get kids out doing things. Just the other day, I was on a Zoom call, and a little second grader got fascinated with salamanders. And then the whole class got fascinated with them. Okay, now that's an example of something they were exposed to. Now little second graders are really into amphibians. Now you can learn about, the other animals that are also amphibians, such as frogs, for example. But I see a lot of kids today getting so stuck on the devices, they're not getting exposed to enough stuff to get interest in really good things that could turn into careers.
That's true. I agree. And another reason why I like this book is we were talking about how to support children in a better way. And Temple, the last time you and I talked, or it was the time before that, I was telling you about my youngest and his interested in foraging. And now it's snakes. So Amazon gives you everything. We just got a snake trap for the backyard. Oh, goodness. It's not out there yet, but that's this weekend's project. So we are setting up a snake trap because he is very interested in different types of snakes. Let's just hope it goes well.
And then where did you see, what started the interest in snakes?
He found a worm snake in the backyard. I'm not sure
Okay.
if that's actually even the right word, name to call them, but so we'll see.
Well, in the Outdoor Scientist, I talk about a rock collection my sister and I had when we were little kids. The kids, there's things just right in the backyard. Now, I want to warn, let's make sure this video is maybe going all around the world. And there's some places where some snakes are extremely dangerous.
Yes, I am not saying go do this.
Yeah, I'm recommending the salamanders are safe. Snakes, depending upon where you're located, you don't want your kid picking up a rattlesnake, and then in some other countries, there's snakes worse than rattlesnakes.
Yes, we've been very clear about types of snakes. We look at pictures of snakes, videos of snakes, and he's not allowed, once we set it up, to touch the trap. So we've got some
snakes. You've got some real safety things. Where with salamanders, you don't.
That's true.
So that's a good example of a specific interest that I would recommend, Holly, that you sit down one evening and you brainstorm. Get a couple of other people and just, have a glass of wine and brainstorm 20 things related to snakes that you're not going to think of otherwise. And you may think of things, jungles. You may think of a country associated with snakes. You may think of a myth with a snake character, a movie with a snake character.
That's right.
All kinds of things. But until you intentionally sit down to do that, it won't happen.
That's right.
And that's what I want to encourage parents to do. We get so busy just rushing from appointment to appointment, come home, get the food on the table, kid goes in front of the screen. And we forget to take the time to be creative to help our child develop interest. And Temple and I just can't emphasize and repeat enough and enough the need to get your kid out there, whether they're interested or not, and just try little thing after, nothing fancy, nothing that costs money. Take them down to the factory that's in town. Let them look around. Take them down to the car shop and let them watch for 5 minutes. Just little things. You never know what they're going to develop an interest in, but they won't if they're not exposed.
They've got to be exposed. And I'm concerned today that kids just aren't exposed to enough interesting real things. I think it's good to go out and observe the real thing. Then you look it up online, not just have everything online. And another interesting thing that snakes do is they shed their skin. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you can find those shed snake skins, and they are safe to touch.
Right.
As long as the snake it's an old shed skin and the snake is totally away at that point.
Well, I love the creativity, and I think that is really important. When my oldest son, who's autistic, was very much into cars, I would take him on the weekends to car dealerships, and he would try to sell me the cars. So he would pretend to sell them, and it was a great way for him to communicate, learn about more cars. And I think it's just a beautiful thing, like you were saying too, Debra, that really coming up with some creative ways to expand those interests. And, again, thank you so much, both of you. For coming.
The other thing is there's actually been 3 really great successes with autistic people selling cars. And they were really, recognized because they had knowledge of every car on the lot. There's been teenagers that walked into a family dealership or a friend of the family dealership, and they just started selling cars. That actually can turn into a really good career, because
I
it's
love
here
it.
Where specialized knowledge is appreciated. Auto parts store was another success story.
So good. And there's just so many different things that we can think about and ways to support them. And like you're saying, it's hard at the end of the day when you're exhausted from work, and it's kind of easy to just go into screens. But when you can set aside some time to be able to think creatively and how to expand on those interests, that's always a good thing. Okay, well, again, thank you both so much for coming on and talking with me about this amazing book. Everyone, I highly recommend that you go and pick up the book, 9 Mindsets for Helping Kids on the Spectrum Navigating Autism.
Hold it up right here.
Yeah, and I've got mine right here.
All right, let's just hold it up. And I've had people ask me where to buy books. Amazon, of course. but also your local bookseller. I like to support local, and a local bookseller can order any book you want. Even if it's not in the store, they can order it for you.
Well, I agree.
Another place
I
to
like
get
to
books.
shop local as well. So I appreciate that. And again, thanks to both of you for your time. It was great having you on today.
Thanks for having us.
Great to be here.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like this episode, please share it with someone. It may just be what they need to watch today. If you're a parent, I'd love if you came on over and joined our Facebook group, Autism ADHD Group for Parents. If you're a therapist or educator, come on over to our group, Autism ADHD Group for Therapists and Educators. You're going to find those links right down there in the notes. Thanks so much, and I can't wait to see you in the next episode.
All content provided is protected under applicable copyright, patent, trademark, and other proprietary rights. All content is provided for informational and educational purposes only. No content is intended to be a substitute for professional medical or psychological diagnosis, advice, or treatment. Information provided does not create an agreement for service between Holly Blanc Moses Crossvine Clinical Group, the interviewee, Holly Blanc Moses LLC, and the recipient. Consult your physician regarding the applicability of any opinions or recommendations with respect to your symptoms or medical condition or the symptoms or medical condition of your family member. Children or adults who show signs of dangerous behavior toward themselves and/or others should be placed immediately under the care of a qualified professional.